Directed by Robert Morgan, Stop Motion is his movie that immediately begins by trying to kill you if you happen to suffer from light-sensitive epileptic seizures. And once it's done weeding out the weak amongst the audience, we're introduced to a woman named Ella maneuvering a one-eyed cyclops. Something that sounds like a euphemism but actually isn't, because she's actually helping her filmmaker mother complete her final stop-motion movie, because much like the art of stop-motion itself, her hands have also stopped. She suffers from extreme arthritis and /or is just a little bit lazy or something, so is having her daughter complete it for her, as she supervises in an overbearing and domineering way due to being jealous of Ella and her stupid working hands. Like any good parent with flippers for hands, she tells Ella that she's useless and that they're going to need to redo all of their work before Ella decides to go out and pay a visit to her boyfriend and his sister in a bar. His sister being someone who also works in the industry, as this movie takes place in an alternate reality where stop motion is rightfully recognized as the world's most superior form of media, and all others are inferior. The next day, while continuing to work with her mother, the power goes out, and apparently her internal body clock is also linked to the power grid, as her mother then has a stroke and falls into a coma for a bit of extra sleep. After Ella's done visiting her mother in the hospital, being a bit lazy, she returns to her boyfriend's house to suddenly see her mother laying on the floor, before suddenly being turned into a pile of various assorted meats, making her wish that Tom had his very own barbecue. After looking at a pile of sloppy meat, Ella decides to continue with her mother's work, as it was her wish to have the movie completed before she died, something which she had been struggling with due to having spades for hands. Tom's or her mother's place apparently wouldn't do, so Ella decided to move into her own flat in an almost completely empty building, where she's going to continue the project on her own and have some fun with her little one-eyed man. After setting up, once it's actually time to start, she struggles to concentrate on her work due to the singing of a nearby girl in the same building, something which Ella finds incredibly infuriating on account of her hating children. But after going to confront her about all of that dreadful noise, otherwise known as singing, the girl shows interest in Ella and what she's working on. So just like that, without a single parent inside, Ella proceeds to let this unattended child into her flat to come and see what she's working on. Luckily for the girl, Ella isn't a serial killer, but just a bit weird. The girl tells Ella that what she's done so far is boring, and that she has a much better idea of a scared girl lost in the woods being followed by something ominous. A man. Gross. After the girl leaves the flat, it appears that Ella enters a dream of some kind, or perhaps a schizophrenic state, as suddenly she finds herself in the woods, before then coming to, and realizing that all of her mother's work has been destroyed, and that a new scene has been created involving a girl in the woods. Confused, she watches back the footage, and it depicts the very same story that the girl had told her the previous evening. Realizing that it's actually a pretty good idea, she decides to steal this small child's idea for her own financial gain, and throws out the characters in the set from her mother's movie. Something that she's currently unable to object to due to being too busy smelling burnt toast. She shows her new friend her progress so far, but once again, the girl isn't entirely impressed. She doesn't want the character to be created out of modeling clay anymore. Instead, she wants to use decaying old meat in case she gets hungry later. Ella eventually agrees to the plan, only because the girl refuses to tell her any more of the story otherwise, as Ella apparently struggles to create her own basic thoughts. The next part of their story involves the now slightly meaty girl finding a house in the middle of the woods, and she uses it to try and hide from the Ash Man, a man who just happens to be named Ash. He's coming for her and will knock on the door for 3 nights in the world's longest game of Ding Dong Ditch. But after progressing with the movie, in the middle of the night, Ella herself is woken up to the sound of someone banging on her door, and after opening it to investigate, she makes the disgusting discovery of a child. It's the girl, who's once again unattended, this time in the middle of the night, as she wants to show Ella something that she's found. A dead fox in the middle of the woods, because please can someone get this girl some friends. She once again wants to use decaying flesh to create the characters, but this time to use the flesh from the fox to create the Ash Man. This is where Ella draws the line due to children being annoying, with the girl then refusing to tell any more of the story until Ella agrees to it. But not wanting to be bossed around by a literal child anymore, Ella returns home to continue her work on her own, where she discovers that she's incapable of forming her very own ideas without the aid of a weird 10-year-old. Not letting that deter her, Ella proceeds to meet Tom's sister at a party to ingest something that's going to help with her creativity, due to Ella being told by her earlier when she stopped by the flat that that's how she gets all of her best ideas. Thinking the advice, put this random substance in your body, is good advice, Ella exits the bathroom and watches as a man gets glassed before reaching out to play with his wound while the little girl is standing there. Playing around with a man's Ashman's insides apparently inspires her to continue working on the film, so she heads out to the woods to recreate the stop-motion classic, Fantastic Mr. Fox. They bring the decaying animal back to the flat with them, and Ella begins cutting into the fox with an over-enthusiastic girl looking over her shoulder. A girl who is so over-enthusiastic that apparently she forgets to continue existing, as we then see with a shot from behind that Ella is actually alone and that there's no one else there with her. With her new art supplies, she manages to create a new version of the Ashman in the girl's vision, but once she's ready to actually start capturing the frames, her intercom system buzzes every time she takes a picture. Hearing no one on it, she looks outside of her window to see the shadow of someone or something standing outside. She looks down the stairwell in the corridor to her flat to see that the Ashman is coming up the stairs for her. She hides away and he begins knocking on the door, just like the Ashman did in the story. And after having a fun night with a strange man in her flat, she is woken up the next day by a concerned Tom, where we learn that she didn't actually take anything given to her by Tom's sister last night, and that she was entirely sober. As sober as she could be after inhaling the fumes of a decaying animal all night. She watches back the footage of the previous night, and the stop-motion movie depicts what she experienced. A woman hiding in her house, scared of the Ashman as he's knocking on the door. Deciding that enough is enough and that she can't really be bothered to work anymore, she goes back with Tom to his place to get away from it all, but while in the shower, sees that her legs are now made out of modeling clay like the original girl she built, before returning to normal. The little girl story is slowly becoming Ella's story, in that it's becoming her actual life. Or she's just a bit weird in the head. She falls asleep in Tom's arms in his bed, but suddenly wakes up, back in the bed at the flat, and looks to see one of the stop-motion characters walk into her bedroom before climbing up onto her bed and tearing open her leg with ease. It turns out, like that time I had a girlfriend, it was actually all just a dream, before going to the cafe with Tom the next day. The cafe where she sees the girl from her building, who appears to be parentally impaired, before she follows Ella into the restroom, where she proceeds to continue with the story, despite Ella saying that she doesn't want to work on it anymore. For the first night, the Ashman comes and knocks on the door, and the second night, the Ashman comes and touches you. Who is the Ashman? Jimmy Savile. To distract herself from this terribly annoying thing known as a child, Ella accepts a job offer from Tom's sister and comes to work at the stop-motion studio where she works, just to find out that instead of actually working on the animation, she's going to be creating 100 eyeballs for the puppets. So after spending hours doing just that, she then discovers that her idea about the girl in the forest, her idea which is actually a little girl's idea, has been entirely ripped off by her friend, who doesn't appear to see what's wrong with that. Something which causes Ella to have a bit of a moment, before proceeding to destroy the puppet, before being forcibly removed from the building for having a temper tantrum. And after having an imaginary conversation with her comatose mother, Ella realizes that she has absolutely nothing in the world apart from her movie. Well, and her loving, caring boyfriend, I suppose. And decides that she's going to return to the flat to continue with the work. Realizing that none of this has actually been her story, she argues with the small child about what happens next, with the girl insisting that the character gets touched by the Ashman, while Ella arguing that she actually escapes. Ella wants to change the outcome of the story, as it appears that it's become her reality, and the last thing she wants to do right now is to be touched by a sweaty, meaty man. It's like going to church all over again. But while attempting to create her vision of the story, the flat begins to shake. The new, rotting version of the Ashman begins to grow from a pile of dirt and leaves, as Ella's legs bend and contort as if they're made of clay. Suddenly she appears to actually be made from clay, as a small little character flees through the crack in the wall as the creature pursues her. With nowhere to go in the Tool music video or back in the real world, the Ashman touches her, just like the girl said he would, and drops a black egg out of its mouth before feeding it to her. After being fed a hard-boiled egg by her new friend who thought she was rather famished, Ella wakes up in the hospital with a stitched-up cut in her leg after supposedly being found wandering about near her building. Tom insists that all of this stops here, and that everything involved with the movie must be destroyed, with Ella agreeing with him, as she's realised that she isn't really the biggest fan of eggs. Well, that is, until her mother passes away in the same hospital she's currently admitted to, before looking over to see the girl standing there. Knowing what she has to do, she heads back to the flat, as she now takes orders from a child, as the girl tells Ella that they need to replace the fox meat with something fresher. The character that Ella had previously made for other movies then begin moving on their own, as they all sit and watch, as Ella begins to pull her own stitches out to an enthusiastic audience of little people. After tearing open the wound more than it already was, Tom and his sister arrive looking for her, and find her as she's pulling out a piece of muscle. Realizing that this girl is on one, they try carrying her out of the flat, when suddenly Ella kicks Tom's sister in the face and pushes him down the stairs. Not liking it when someone everyone copies her work, Ella begins beating the woman with a tripod before crushing her windpipe, before turning her attention to a still alive Tom and making him not a still alive Tom. After covering his mouth and nose because he snores too loud, she brings both of them back to the flat and begins her arts and crafts with them at the girl's command. With all of the fresh supplies a girl could possibly need, she recreates both of the characters, now in their final form, using Tom and his sister. After they've been created, Ella and the girl watch as the Ashman begins approaching the girl puppet before suddenly he stops and comes straight for Ella. Thinking that that's a little bit weird, she hides in a cupboard from it before a now much larger and lifelike version of the Ashman gets in to play 7 Minutes in Heaven with her, except with more salmonella. She begins clawing away at her own face as it now appears to be made from modelling clay before offering it to the Ashman to consume. He eats the entire thing as we then see the egg that's inside of Ella hatches before she suddenly wakes up in the woods and comes across a house like the one from her movie. Inside, she finds the girl watching footage of Ella laying on the floor in the real world before the real Ella passes away. Ella looks to see a large box in the middle of the room, one that resembles the box that she kept all of her other puppet creations in before climbing inside, as much like all of her older puppets, she's no longer needed and the movie ends. Because despite thinking that none of this story was her own, it was actually hers all along, and that's why it couldn't be changed. Now before this video comes to an end, I'd like to just give a massive shout out and a big thank you to all of the YouTube members and patrons. The people who every month continue to go out of their way to show support towards the channel, something which I'm incredibly appreciative of. If you're interested in becoming a YouTube member or a patron yourself, not only are you just generally being a great help, but you also get access to a few little cool perks, like being able to join the private Discord server, where you can then get links to uncensored versions of all videos going forward. Starting off with this week's new YouTube signups, a massive thank you to David, Loon96, Macy K1054, Stephen Todd, Kishjin Atapot, Gabriel Escalada, Luca, Keegan Neely, Anomaly, Jack Lane, Zuranto, Zane Monroe, KST, Sharka, Thy Lordship, Saskoy Dominic, Thomas Stewart, Simulation Flow, Benedict Martel, Mia, Kason Talbot, Captain Beans, TJ, Starlord, Dark, Galligan, Thunderstorm, Jordan Parker, Christian Haskell, Die, Jennifer Delgadillo, One-Armed Shinobi, Snippling S, Hubert Saferga, Ben Cobfield, Tuba Goes Yeet, K, Sungaf Fandafarian, Beto the Chicken Guy, Pedro Manfrenate Martendel, Mano Ferrero, Lights Aida, Reigns VT, GB Hub, Mike Crane, and Crystal. Now heading over to this week's new Patreon signups, a massive thank you to William Sillis, Vic Quoa, Sinner, Master Tank, VHS Soho, Lars Baker, Joseph Butcher, Aaron, Tristan Van Selm, Giacomo Milligan, Aaron Dix, Mark Ruffalo, Cameron Taylor, Dylan Russell, Lloyd Edwards, Oscar Slan, Nalu, Idle Mog, M, Toby6901, Serge Quickie, Buggy15, Wee Wee, Moss, Praline, Clementine Bostock, Briar Fletcher, Alexis Miller, Duco Stam, Chase Amerson, Trevin Duncombe, Brady, Luis Garcia, Richard Wiener, Angel P. Iglesias, 01, Cameron Captree, Amelia Gray, Dreadhead, LE1234, Amber, Chasefer, Callum Mitchell, Sylvie Devine, Sophine Hayek, Frank the Tank, Weldon, Basparol, Harrison King, Anxious Gamer 30, Commander Spleen, Christian Viordiak, Austin, Gary, Andrea Hernandez, Pavel, Rick Colby, Bossy, and Matei Pika. So once again, a big shout out to all of the YouTube members and patrons, and a big thank you to everyone else for watching.